6-year-old Mary Boyle and her identical twin sister Anne shared an unbreakable bond. They were more than sisters, they were best friends. They would do everything together. They would play football, skipping, play with the neighbours. Mary, being the firstborn, was a little more boisterous. She set the pace for herself and Anne. She would finish Anne's sentences for her. Anne was a little quieter, a little shy, but Mary was very chatty. When one of them was sick, the other one was sick. They knew what each other were thinking. They were a happy little duo by all accounts. On Patrick's Day, March 17th, twins Mary and Anne and their brother Patrick and their parents, Charlie and Anne, who I will call Mr. and Mrs. Boyle, set off on a 2-hour journey to their grandparents' rural farm in Cashellard near Ballyshannon, County Donegal, for the anniversary mass of their uncle who had died 9 years previously on a farming accident. In their grandparents' house on the following day, March 18th, the children were playing outside, while little Mary stayed inside to help her mother with the dishes after dinner. Suddenly little Mary ran over to Mrs. Boyle saying, "Mum, I forgot to give you a kiss this morning." She flung her arms around her and kissed her. Then she went on outside to play with the other children. Uncle Jerry, who was Mrs. Boyle's brother, was outside working on a wall. He set off at some stage out of the yard to go to the neighbours across the fields with a ladder that he had borrowed from them to fix the roof. These neighbours lived about 400 yards away. They were the only neighbours in the vicinity, and it was across boggy, marshy ground. Allegedly, little Mary decided to follow after Uncle Jerry in her oversized Wellington boots. She would have toddled along behind him. Uncle Jerry later returned, but little Mary never did. So what happened to little Mary? Why was no one ever charged with a crime or even formally questioned? And why does a cloud of suspicion surround this case? Some believe there's more to the story, with whispers of cover-ups and secrets. This case isn't just about a missing child. It's about a family's ongoing heartache and a whole community searching for answers. Little Mary is missing since March 18th, 1977. The case is still open, but there have been no new developments. My name is Louise. Welcome to A Drop in the Ocean. And let's dive in. This is the longest running missing persons case in Ireland. So let's have a look at the details. The day after St. Patrick's Day, March 18th, in Mary's grandparents' house, we had Mary and Anne, the identical twins, their brother Patrick, their parents, Mr. and Mrs. Boyle. We had Mrs. Boyle's brother, Uncle Jerry, and his wife and their 2 children, and this land was Uncle Jerry's. And then we had Mrs. Boyle's parents, the grandparents. So 11 people in total. We had 6 adults and 5 children. So firstly, let me just explain a few things to you which may otherwise be confusing. In Ireland, we often have dinner at 1, 2, 3 p.m, especially on special occasions or if there's a family gathering for any reason. And that is what took place on this day in that house. Also, in 1977, they didn't have any electronic devices such as mobile phones, tablets, iPads, anything like that. Most people wouldn't have had a wristwatch. So people were very loose with time. They weren't as time obsessed as we are now. There were certain things at set times, such as meals, or on a farm if the animals needed to be fed or milked, or if someone was going to or from work and things like that. But generally, people were very loose with time. So the times that we were given for this case for specific events, they were rough guesses or estimates at best. Also, the times we were given for specific events on this day changed over the years by multiple people, with even an hour of a difference. So the times we have for these crucial hours following little Mary's disappearance, they're not specific. So with that in mind, after dinner on this day, 4 of the 5 children were playing outside. Little Anne, her brother Patrick, and their 2 cousins. Uncle Jerry was working on a wall at the front of the house. Little Mary was inside initially, helping her mother, and this is when Mary remembered she had forgotten to give her mother a kiss that morning, and she kissed her mother. At some point thereafter, now we have been given 3:30 to 4:20. Mrs. Boyle's father, so the children's grandfather, urged Mrs. Boyle to check on the children. And she said, "It's fine, they're fine, like I can hear them playing outside." But he insisted, "No, go check on the children." So she did. She looked out the window and she could only see a couple of them. So she went out and she went over to the wall and only saw 4 of the 5 children. She said to the children, "Where's Mary?" but they hadn't seen her since dinner time. Uncle Jerry was working on the wall, so she asked him, have you seen Mary? But he didn't respond. He stayed building the wall. So Mrs. Boyle rushed inside. She asked her mother to light some blessed candles, and she got the holy water and spread it around the house. Then she guesses around 10 minutes later went back outside, and she was frantic, so she was shouting. And she was saying, where's Mary? I can't find Mary. Mrs. Boyle said at this stage, Uncle Jerry jumped in his car and sped off the direction of the neighbour's house, with Mrs. Boyle later saying, when I looked out and saw only the 4 children, Jerry was there at the wall. Jerry didn't mention to me at any time that Mary was missing and didn't tell me that she was with him until the first search was carried out. So the family started searching at this point in all the local area, the surrounding area of the house, to see where little Mary was. They had no idea. While searching, frantically shouting for little missing Mary, PJ Coughlin was a local fisherman, and he and 2 other fishermen were on a nearby pond, and they could hear this going on because everyone was shouting and screaming for Mary. So they heard the search party before anyone came towards them. PJ Coughlin has said that then Uncle Jerry was on top of a bank and shouted down to them, have you seen a wee girl? PJ Coughlin shouted back to him, no, there's been no child here. So then shortly after, they could see Mrs. Boyle cumbrously trying to get through this horribly rough terrain, even falling a few times. So PJ Coughlin went towards her and she asked him, have you seen a little girl? We can't find my daughter Mary. He told her, no, there have been no children here. So PJ Coughlin asked her, did she want him to go alert the Gardaí? And she said, yes, please. So he jumped in his car and went to get the Gardaí. Because again, there were no mobile phones. Most houses didn't even have landlines. I grew up in a place very similar to this place we're talking about. I know my parents didn't have a landline till the late 1980s, 1988 I think it was. So if you wanted to call the guards, you had to go and physically fetch the guards. So PJ Coughlin reckons it was about 6:30 when he went to fetch the guards, with about half an hour of daylight left. It would have been only a 10-minute trip for him to go fetch the guards in Ballyshannon. There was a rumour that someone had seen little Mary being taken away in a red car. What this actually was PJ Coughlin, this fisherman that went and fetched the guards. In the days following, he remembered that he had seen a red car, a Volkswagen Beetle, up on the bridge, which was about another 300 yards away from him. It was stopped. There was a wall in front of it, so he couldn't see if anyone got in or out of the car. As he looked at the car, it sped off. And he reported this to the Gardaí, but it was never recorded anywhere. Following this initial search by the family, when they regrouped, it was only then that Uncle Jerry informed Mrs. Boyle that Mary had followed him earlier. But he told her that Mary had turned around halfway there. And Mary's sister Anne says this would have been 3 fields away from the house. And he said that there was a puddle of water, about 6 inches. Little Mary couldn't make it through with her Wellingtons. So he told her to go on home. This account has also changed a few times over the years. Another time he reportedly said that he didn't know why little Mary went home. He certainly didn't tell her to, but she was chatting away behind him and then she stopped speaking. And he turned around to see where she was and he could see that she was heading home, but he certainly didn't tell her to go home. And then there was another account of her being unable to climb over a wall, so she turned around and headed back then. So on telling Mrs. Boyle this, Mrs. Boyle jumped into the car and went around all the local roads to see if she could see any sign of little Mary. But again, nothing, no sign. So once the Gardaí were alerted, Sergeant Martin Collins was the first on the scene at the grandparents' house. However, he didn't enter for around an hour because on arrival, Uncle Jerry told him the family were too upset that he couldn't go in yet. So he waited. So around an hour later, he got inside. Having spoken to the family, a huge search took place. There were hundreds of people. There were the Gardaí, the family. Then there was even soldiers from a local army camp. There was a drama festival taking place in Ballyshannon, and the play they were performing at the time was on Treel. Now remember this, it's strangely coincidental and I'll come back to it later. But when the play finished, there was an announcement made that this little 6-year-old girl was gone missing and looking for volunteers to help search. So a minibus load of people went from there. So there ended up being a few hundred people. The soldiers even shot flares into the sky to light up the area because it was dark. But they searched everything, ditches, hedges, bog holes, everything. There was a thorough search carried out. and they reported that not a trace was found of little Mary. Now, it's estimated that it was about 2.5 hours following the discovery that little Mary was missing that the Gardaí were called. A lot of people questioned this, even the Gardaí, but I will tell you, having grown up in a place like this is not unusual. If a child goes missing, everyone looks for the child. The first thing you think of is not to go get the Gardaí, because generally the child will be found very close to where they were supposed to be. They will just have wandered a little bit, maybe in the next field or behind a hedge. But for the family to go out searching, this is common practice. It's how it's done. And generally the child is found. If they're not, then you go get the Gardaí. So this would have been normal. I don't, however, understand why the guard was not let into the house straight away. This was an emergency situation. That I can't explain. So in the days that followed, everyone searched high and low. The fields, ditches, hedges, bog holes, everywhere. But nothing was found. Nothing, not a trace. Or so was reported anyway. Terrains like this, where they were searching, they have bog holes or swallies. And what a swally is it's a hole that's filled with water from the bog and there's vegetation growing over it. So they're very dangerous places because you don't recognise that it's anything different than the ground you're walking on. But they can be deep and dangerous. I know of two where I grew up. One of them, the smaller one, was one where I know my grandparents lost at least one cow in this swally hole. The second one, a JCB sunk in it to where you couldn't see the roof of the JCB. So they're extremely dangerous. But just as I knew of these two growing up, you would know of these dangerous spots in the surrounding land. And this was Uncle Jerry's ground that they were searching, and he was involved in all the searches, so he would have been able to inform the search parties of where there were any danger zones that an accident could have happened. So in the days that followed, they even did a reconstruction using little Anne, Mary's identical twin sister, to follow the same route that Mary had. They went along with little Anne. Anne didn't know this was happening, but at the point where Mary allegedly turned, the inspector pretended he had forgotten something that was back in the house, and as predicted, Anne said, "I'll run back and get it for you." So they let her on her own to see what would happen. But they had Gardaí along the way in shrubs and bushes, but little Anne made it back to the house. Little Mary had been eating a packet of Tato crisps, and she had a purple and white ribbon in her hair. She had a purple cardigan and oversized Wellingtons. But reportedly nothing was found. There was simply no sign of little Mary, nothing to point to what happened or where she might be. The Macaulays were the neighbours Mary's uncle had returned the ladder to that day. They were questioned. They confirmed he had arrived with the ladder and spoke to them for a short while. So they were cleared. With no success in finding little Mary or any trace of her, 2 to 3 weeks following her disappearance, the lakes, ponds and all bog holes were searched. Although the family didn't believe she would be found in a body of water because she was afraid of water. She hated it, so she wouldn't have gone near a lake or a pond. But there was simply nowhere else to look at this stage. After around 6 weeks, the Boyles had to make the heartbreaking decision to return home. Little Anne was petrified. She herself was going to disappear just like her sister, or that her parents were going to disappear. She used to cling to their hands if they were walking on the road or anything, out of fear that they would vanish into thin air just like little Mary. It later transpired that 2 days after little Mary disappeared, depending on where you read it, it's either one farmer or 3 farmers came upon what they believed to be a shallow grave right there on the land that was being searched. One of them pulled up a sod to see and saw what he believed to be brown hair. So they immediately alerted the Gardaí. The Gardaí had set up a caravan on the lane as a point to go to, if you had any information. If you were not close enough to the caravan and you found something, you were to stand and shout so that Gardaí could come and see what you had found. So they were alerted to this shallow grave. But this shallow grave wasn't investigated at all and wouldn't be for many years. Another thing that came out years later was that the day after little Mary disappeared, 2 teenage boys found a purple cardigan half a mile from where Mary disappeared at a lake, beside the lake. They stood and shouted and alerted the Gardaí. The Gardaí came and took the cardigan, but there's no record of this and no one knows where that purple cardigan went to. For legal reasons, in this section, I can't call the person by name, but a person known to the family, known well by Anne and Mary, was invited at the time to come speak to the Gardaí in Ballyshannon Garda Station. And he did. Detective Sergeant Aidan Murray has referred to this person as the suspect. During this interview, as the suspect was being questioned, he became more and more stressed, even reportedly starting to cry. Now at this point, the inspector present nudged Sergeant Murray to ease off. Sergeant Murray was to go and get a drink of water for the suspect. When he got back with the drink of water, the suspect had composed himself, shut down, and there were no further questions. This suspect was never again questioned. Nothing further happened. So on the day that little Mary disappeared, the people around her were her twin sister Anne, her brother Patrick, her two cousins and their parents, Uncle Jerry and his wife, Mr. and Mrs. Boyle, and their grandparents. So if you are into watching investigations or interrogations, documentaries on missing people, or true crime of any description, you will know that the family, particularly the last person to see the missing child, are the focus. They are the people who can provide most information to the Gardaí, such as what the missing person was like, where they might be more likely to go or not. For example, that little Mary was afraid of water, and many other really important details. However, no one was formally questioned in this case. Margot O'Donnell is a very famous Irish country singer, as is her brother Daniel O'Donnell. They are also distant relatives of little Mary's. Margot heard about her disappearance while she was in the UK performing, and she was due home the next day anyway. So immediately on her arrival, she joined this search, and she later said everyone who was searching, they were kind of saying they weren't going to bother searching anymore because everyone knew what happened. Margot has campaigned endlessly, alongside Mary's sister Anne and their cousin Joe, for justice for little Mary. Margot even released a song, The Missing Mary Boyle, to raise funds for new searches for the missing girl in the years that followed. The media avoided this case like a plague. Irish media was strictly censored in Ireland. Church and state dictated what could be printed. There are still defamation laws that need to be abided by, but journalists can write a lot more now. If only they would focus on little Mary Boyle. Remember the farmers that found the shallow grave? Well, in 2013, 36 years later, Scantech performed a ground scan on this area. Now, this was not organised by the Gardaí or politicians or anything like that. It was organised by the Sunday World, and this scan showed anomalies. What this means is when the ground is scanned, if the soil hasn't been disturbed in any way, nothing will be found. But if something has been buried, an animal, a human, anything else, this will show up as anomalies. So if for any reason the ground has been dug or anything has been buried, the scan will detect this, and they call it anomalies. However, before they could perform a proper archaeological dig on this site, the Gardaí brought in a JCB and dug the site over in one day, announcing that nothing had been found. Normally, a site will be dug, specifically a suspected grave site. It will be dug with hand tools and little brushes even, because they're looking for bone fragments and they don't want to destroy any evidence. So it's done very carefully. But a quarter acre was dug using a JCB. After digging for one day, the search was completed and found nothing. Retired Garda Sergeant Alan Bailey, who worked with the Serious Crime Unit, said a much more thorough search should have been carried out. In fact, he said an archaeological type dig using scraping tools should have checked every inch of soil, saying, "I have never heard of a JCB being used in a search for a shallow graver. In fact, it would just be about the last thing you would use." Gardaí told Donegal Daily they are not making any comment on the latest dig for the 6-year-old who went missing 36 years ago. This led to a complaint being lodged with the Garda Ombudsman. So that's who you would complain to if there is suspected Garda misconduct of any sort. But there were no findings of any wrongdoing. This ongoing tragedy unfortunately split the Boyle family. Mary's identical twin sister, Anne, firmly believes that Mary had a secret, that Mary was killed that day by someone she knew well, having been sexually assaulted and in fear that she would tell, being the feisty little girl that she was. So Anne, along with other family members, but not all, believed that little Mary was killed that day by someone she knew, and not only that, but that due to political connections, the investigation was stopped. In a YouTube documentary in 2016, two of the Gardaí involved with the case and now retired said there was a phone call from a high-ranking politician at the time to the Garda station instructing them to not continue with the line of investigation they were following. The main suspect was not to be questioned further. Following this documentary's release in 2016, which received much publicity, both of these retired Gardaí withdrew some of what they were portrayed as saying. In fact, saying that what they had said regarding a phone call received by a politician had been taken out of context, and also that things they had said were not included. They now claim no phone call interfered with the investigation. The Irish Times newspaper in 2016 spoke with them, saying both retired sergeants have agreed with Mary's twin sister, Anne Doherty, that the child may have been killed because she was about to reveal that she had been sexually assaulted. Collins emphatically rejects the Gardaí were covering up political interference in the case. He said a call was made to the station, the gist of it being that none of a small group of people linked to the Cashel-Ard area was to be made a suspect. The call was taken by a station orderly and directed to one of the offices down the corridor. No politician was actually named by these retired Gardaí. However, following the publicity received by this documentary, politician Sean McKenniff sued for defamation, with irishnews.com at the time headlining, "A veteran Fianna Fáil County Donegal councillor has denied trying to influence a Garda investigation into the disappearance of schoolgirl Mary Boyle." Sean McKenniff, who is the Republic's longest-serving politician, said he emphatically and unconditionally denies that he was the politician who allegedly contacted the Gardaí in Ballyshannon at the time of the disappearance of Mary Boyle. I found it interesting that Jonathan Sugarman, who was a banking whistleblower, before the Finance Committee in 2017 mentions the Mary Boyle case as one example of where, when it comes to whistleblowing, in his words, official Ireland had taken steps to discredit them. The Journal ran this story where it says Sugarman, citing the Grace, Mary Boyle and Garda whistleblower cases, said that official Ireland had taken steps to discredit them. He said, "My life has been utterly destroyed simply because I did the right thing. I have been unemployable for the last 10 years, he said, but noted that no regulator had ever been prosecuted for the failings that led to the multi-billion euro bailout. Mary and Anne's mother, Mrs. Boyle, is at odds with Anne over going public with all of this. She was furious that Anne has spoken publicly about family matters, saying things can be done quietly. This has caused a division as Anne and her mother no longer communicate. Mrs. Boyle, as Little Mary's next of kin, also disallowed an inquest to take place in 2018, which Mary's twin Anne and relatives had been fighting for. Mrs. Boyle allegedly initially said herself she knew what happened to Little Mary and who was responsible. She reportedly said this to multiple people, including Gardaí, Margot O'Donnell and Anne, but has consistently denied knowing any such thing since. And also remember this point for a little bit later. Mrs. Boyle has received horrible hate mail over this, even containing death threats. Now the police looked into this and tracked down who it was, and the person, I believe, died before they could be prosecuted, but they were found. So that investigation went very well. So why would a mother not want justice for her daughter, especially if she did know who was responsible? Well, people have drawn their own conclusions, as stories have changed multiple times over the years, perhaps in trying to come to terms with everything or misplaced loyalty. This was the 70s in Ireland. So what was Ireland like in 1977? Well, if you look it up on Google, you'll find that Ireland experienced a significant political change. Fianna Fáil, a political party, won the general election. Their leader, Jack Lynch, became the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister. You'll also find that a crater on the planet Mercury was named after the Irish poet W.B. Yeats, and that the Queen came to town in Northern Ireland, even though the Troubles were active, which meant it required strict security. That's the sort of thing you'll find if you Google Ireland in 1977. However, there was more to Ireland at that point, and to Irish society. If you're a subscriber, you have a good idea of what Ireland was like in 1977, unfortunately. But for those of you who aren't, Ireland's Magdalen laundries were still in full swing at this time. And I feel this all ties into this case, so bear with me. These were institutions where girls as young as 9 and women were effectively imprisoned. They were held against their will and forced to work for no pay, slave labour. And this was basically to police Ireland's morality. But it was done in such a warped fashion, locking up girls and women, often because they were victims of sexual assaults. They were seen as the problem. If you get rid of the problem, well then there's no problem. Now, I'm not saying I think Little Mary was in one of these places, not at all, but bear with me. Because they were seen as the problem, there were no perpetrators. As the decades went on, society moved along with it. They had no other choice. Church and state ran these things, so it was basically law. Perpetrators ran free with no accountability. It ended up where mothers were placing their daughters in these places as victims of abuse in the family of all sorts. So the abuser could be the mother's son, her husband, her brother, her cousin, or a neighbour, anybody. But you didn't point at boys. It just wasn't done, particularly if they were a family member. You got rid of the person who was talking about it. No body, no crime. Now, girls and women were put in there for many other reasons, often by the state as alternatives to prisons, but also as a social welfare type of place or place of safety, which they certainly were not. But this just gives you some idea of the society in Ireland at the time and absolutely abnormal societal norms. Perpetrators were not considered perpetrators, allowing them to run free and reoffend. And I just couldn't help but notice possible connections with how society were at the time and Little Mary's case where no one was held accountable. This thing of leave well enough alone, what's done is done, and what would the neighbours say? It's who we became, unfortunately, and we've grown a lot since that, and people have realised that that's not right, it's wrong. But there are still traces of it. Mary Boyle was 6 years old. She was innocent. Mary Boyle was a victim. No matter what happened that day, it wasn't good. And whoever the perpetrator was, they didn't and don't deserve protecting, no matter who they're related to or what politicians they're tied to. A perpetrator is a perpetrator. In 2008, the Irish public broadcaster RTE broadcast a documentary programme about the case called Cracking Crime. It's been wiped. There's no trace of it that I can find on the internet anymore. But allegedly many details in the documentary differed from the details we know from the family. It pointed towards it basically being an outside job, even a foreigner, as no local person could be identified. The case of Little Mary Boyle had never been debated in the Dáil, the Parliament. The first date I could find where Little Mary was mentioned was October 6th, 2015, 38 years after the date of this tragedy. Mary Lou MacDonald brought it up and the allegations of political interference and suspected Garda cover-up, asking the Taoiseach Enda Kenny to meet with Mary's twin Anne, which he agreed to, and Anne Boyle was present in the gallery for this. In 2015, Deputy Thomas Pringle asked the Minister for Justice and Equality, Frances Fitzgerald, about her plans to authorise a new investigation into Mary Boyle's case. And then Mary Lou MacDonald again raised it in the Dáil on the 19th of July 2016, as the Taoiseach had since met with Anne Boyle and Margot O'Donnell. And here Mary Lou MacDonald was informed by the Taoiseach, "I had a very good meeting with the Doherty family. Arising from that, I sent an official record to the Garda inspector dealing with the report into the Gardaí themselves. I understand that since then the Special Investigative Unit is looking afresh at this case." And then in 2016 it was raised by Lynn Boylan MEP in the European Parliament, where she highlighted the lack of direction in the case. None of these conversations or investigations resulted in anything. In 2016, permission was given, having been previously withheld, to search fully the farmhouse and surrounding area where Little Mary Boyle went missing, but no such search has taken place. In 2016, a Facebook page called Justice for Mary Boyle was created to try get justice. It had initially been created by someone with a strong interest in getting justice for Little Mary. It has since been taken over by Little Mary's relatives on her father's side, who have been fighting passionately alongside Anne and Margot. Here's a taste of what they were up against. In January 2022, they posted just a story here from 2016, when I, Joe, Mary's cousin, visited the farm where Mary went missing from for the first time. Her uncle Jerry, the last person seen with her and who now owns the land, arrived. I have him on video saying I could arrange a search there anytime. After a documentary came out and there was a buzz around the case, Margot O'Donnell arranged to get a search underway on the land. We had cadaver dogs ready and a ground-penetrating radar company, which can tell when the land has been disturbed. Going back decades, top brass of the guards visited Margot and promised her that this would be allowed to go ahead, just that at least one guard had to be there in case anything would be found. They said they were sure Jerry would cooperate, but that if he didn't, they would obtain a warrant. We were just waiting on word. The top brass guard visited Margot and told her Jerry had refused to allow a search to us. Margot arranged a meeting with me and Inspector Barry Doyle in the hope I could talk him round. I met him in Letterkenny Garda Station and pleaded with him, but he wasn't interested. He said they would soon do another search of the farm with their own radar and without dogs. I asked why, when it is known how good cadaver dogs are at finding human remains, and why use state funds when we had a very respectable company ready to do ground-penetrating radar for free. He had no real answer, just said that's the way it was going to be. That was autumn 2016. No search was ever carried out. Pre-pandemic, we got a tip-off about a lake that was never searched. We contacted a diving club who were all too willing to search it for us. Again, they told us that a guard needed to be there, just one guard in a squad car, in case it turned into a crime scene. The guards refused our request to do so. So in December 2016, the Justice for Mary Boyle page created a post to summarise and keep everyone up to date on the story so far. In reference to the main suspect, here's that post. It has also emerged there were problems with the septic tank on the rental property and that it continuously blocked. When the suspect was asked to fix it, he became aggressive and refused. More information can be revealed about his behaviour on the night Mary disappeared. In the early hours of that morning, he left his house and vanished for several hours in his car. Retired officers say they do not know where he went and what the purpose of his trip was. Neither his house, his rented property, nor his car were searched after Mary's murder. The suspect's statement of March 1977 is littered with inconsistencies and contradictions, which have never been explained by Gardaí. When he was spoken to informally by retired officers who were among the first on the scene, he broke down. One of the officers put it directly to him that he had murdered Mary. He did not deny it and asked for a glass of water. When the officer returned with the water, the suspect had composed himself and was allowed to leave the station. He was never arrested. Another officer describes how this man broke down on another occasion when it was suggested he killed Mary and displayed clear signs of guilt. The officer then got a kick under the table from his inspector and was asked to leave the room. Former Sergeant Martin Collins claims that a brother of the chief suspect came to Ballyshannon Garda Station in tears in the days after the murder and told him it was his belief his brother was responsible. He also left Sergeant Collins in little doubt that Mary was sexually assaulted before her death. Mary Boyle's mother has also identified this man as the killer numerous times privately to Gardaí, her daughter Anne and Margot O'Donnell. It is now more than a year since Anne Doherty and Margot O'Donnell went to Pearse Street Garda Station to give statements about the suspect and plead with officers to make an arrest. Garda Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan refuses to order one or to answer any questions about all of the inconsistencies in the case. So what other theories were looked at? The Troubles were active at the time, but the only way they would have really impacted this case at all is that there was extremely strict policing of the border with many road checks in place. No vehicle could have passed through without being checked. Other than that, there's simply no connection. Robert Black was a Scottish serial killer arrested in July 1990 who focused on young girls between the ages of 5 and 11 as far as is known. He died in prison in 2016, aged 68. Robert Black was a delivery van driver who did frequent Northern Ireland. However, it turned out he wasn't even in Ireland at the time of Mary's disappearance, let alone in Donegal, and even if he had been, there's simply no way a delivery van would have gone unnoticed in the remote back roads of Donegal. Also, Robert Black's motive to stalk his victim victims, to watch them for a time and get used to their routines, their habits. He planned his kidnappings meticulously. He couldn't have done this with Mary Boyle. She wasn't from this area. This would have been a chance encounter, and it simply wasn't his MO. He was convicted of a case in Northern Ireland in the early 1980s, but how he was caught was he left a paper trail everywhere he went, between delivery dockets, fuel receipts, and ferry tickets, because each time he would be in Ireland he would have taken the ferry. There was no paper trail of him ever having been in Donegal. In 2014, Brian McMahon was arrested from prison where he was serving time for sex offences against two brothers in South Donegal, to which he had pled not guilty. For Brian McMahon to have been the abductor, he would have had to travel on foot to this remote farm and happened to come upon little Mary Boyle, pick her up and take her on foot. He was released without charge after 48 hours. McMahon later went on public record denying any involvement in the disappearance and stating that local people knew he could not have been involved. He also said that the journey to the Garda station was dramatic, lights and sirens, and that he'd been left sitting in the squad car for the media to take their pictures of him. And it's highly unlikely it was a chance encounter. Not only was this a rural area, but little Mary was wearing Wellingtons that were too large for her. Now, I'm well used to wearing Wellingtons. I wouldn't use oversized Wellingtons if you paid me. They're the most uncomfortable, cumbersome things. It's difficult to walk in them. They will give you blisters and skin your heels and your ankles. You would be reluctant to even go up a hill, or you would follow your path. If I had to go any distance, I would prefer to kick them off and walk in my bare feet. But little Mary's Wellingtons have never been found. So it just seems highly unlikely that little Mary was abducted away from the farm by someone she didn't know. Let me know what you think about that. So many supporters of justice for Mary Boyle believe that these other investigations were basically smokescreens, that everyone knew that this was a local person who did this. Numerous other spot searches have taken place over the years, basically when publicity rises about the case, but nothing was ever found. I believe a well was also searched at another time. Again, no trace of little Mary. Many believe, including Mary's identical twin Anne, the property where little Mary went missing from, which is now derelict, needs to be thoroughly searched, but properly, professionally, with the right tools. The walls, anywhere any building took place. There have also been cold case reviews, but again, nothing. The last person to see little Mary Boyle alive, her uncle Jerry, passed away earlier this year, in March 2023. Mary's sister Anne Boyle did an interview with the Irish Independent following her uncle's death. And the article says that her disappearance has been the subject of a Garda cold case review and repeated appeals which yielded nothing. Anne believes the answer to what happened to her sister lies within her own family. On the recent death of her uncle, she said she would welcome Gardaí revisiting the case. All I have to cling to now is hope. I don't want my own children to have to search for answers, although they would in a heartbeat, she said. My twin sister is the first thing I think of every morning, and my last thought at night. With this article going on to say, the anniversary is a bit different this year because the last person to see my sister is no longer alive, Anne told the Sunday Independent. I just hope that maybe there are others who might have been told something, who might now speak out after the death of my uncle. Anne still obviously suffers the loss of her identical twin sister to this day. All the important milestones, every single birthday that she should have shared with little Mary, Anne's wedding day, the birth of her own children, Mary should have been there. Although Anne says that she has always felt, in a way, Mary is still with her. Little Mary Elizabeth Boyle's body has never been found. In Ireland's longest unsolved case, again putting us on the map for all the wrong reasons, another stain on our conscience. Whether political interference, police incompetence, family secrets, misplaced loyalties, or a mixture of all these things, shouldn't today's people be able to put efforts into closing this case and bringing little Mary home? Little Mary's father, Charlie, has since passed away, and all Mary's sister Anne now wants is for little Mary's body to come home, to be given a dignified burial with her dad. This has been such a long, ongoing case that it's easy for people to forget the most important person in this equation is Little Mary Boyle, the actual victim of this story. Thanks for watching. Please help push this video out by giving the thumbs up. Leave a comment. Let me know what red flags you saw along the way. There have been a lot of them, but I'd like to see, have you spotted anything I haven't? Let's talk about it in the comments. So like, share, comment and subscribe if you like what I'm doing here. And better again if you or someone you know is a journalist. Let's try get the story going again. Nothing much happens with these cases unless there's huge movement, unless the media runs with the story. I will update you here if hopefully there is a conclusion reached. If your family or a family you know has a case you feel needs publicity, please let me know. My email address will be in the description and it's adropintheocean70 @gmail.com. Give me as much detail as possible and I'll get back to you. And then last but not least, the Justice for Mary Boyle page on Facebook. Go join it. As many people as are behind this as possible, the better. Okay, thanks very much guys. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Good luck. Bye bye.